This being your third season, it seems like you've been a lot more assertive or spicy this year.
Think so? I don't know. Spicy. That's good. I feel like for me, it's just my approach. It's just coming in and just trying to be dominant in anything the team needs. And so if that gives off spicy, which I really don't think it does, I feel like I'm like kind of quiet.
Spice?
No, I just know it's spicy. But yeah, I feel like that's just been my mindset, is just coming in and just being the player that I need to be for us, whatever that looks like.
Nobody expected the Indiana Fever to make the playoffs this year. Hell, nobody expected them to win more than 10 games after what happened. When your biggest superstar goes down after just 13 games and 4 other core players follow her to the injury list, that's supposed to be game over. That's supposed to be tank mode. Instead, something absolutely wild happened that has the entire WNBA shook. The Fever didn't just survive. They thrived in ways that have analysts scratching their heads and opponents terrified of what's coming next.
Playoffs! That's how we clinch, baby! We can't! W. Playoffs! Bow! Yeah! Playoffs, baby!
Mitchell in transition. Lays that up and in for our first bucket of the game. Sims off the cross again into the paint, lays it up and in.
What you're about to hear isn't just another underdog story. This is about a team that got completely destroyed by injuries and somehow discovered they were better for it. About a locker room mantra so powerful that it turned role players into killers. About leadership emerging from the most unexpected places and a mindset that has veterans around the league taking notes. Because when Aliyah Boston stood in that Washington locker room after clinching playoffs and dropped a line that had her teammates buzzing, she wasn't just celebrating. She was revealing the secret weapon that nobody saw coming.
When you think back to the beginning of the season, if someone were to tell you, like, this is where you would be, this is your team, like, at the end of the season, like, genuinely, what do you think the reaction would be?
Probably no stinking way. I don't think, thinking back to the beginning of the season, that anyone would have ever foreseen it going like this.
The injury bug hit the Indiana Fever like a damn natural disaster, and Caitlin Clark was patient zero. July 15th changed everything. One awkward landing during their win over Connecticut, and suddenly the face of the franchise was done for the year. The groin injury looked routine at first, but as weeks turned into months, the brutal truth emerged. Clark wasn't coming back. The rookie sensation who was supposed to carry Indiana into a new era was watching from the sidelines in street clothes, and fans felt like they'd been punched in the gut.
If things looked like it got harder, for us it was about sticking together, and I think through everything you're able to see that, us play with joy, us play together regardless of who's on that floor.
But Clark was just the beginning of this nightmare. Sophie Cunningham went down with a knee injury that ended her season before it really started. Chloe Bigelow, who was expected to provide crucial depth, got the same devastating news. Sydney Colson, a veteran presence the team desperately needed, was sidelined indefinitely. Then Ari McDonald joined the casualty list with a foot injury that wouldn't heal. 5 players, 5 contributors who were supposed to be part of the foundation, gone.
For whatever reason, things happen, and you've got to continue to put your best foot forward. You got to continue to stay the course. This group has been forced to grow strong roots, and teams can go one of two ways when those things happen. You either use it to pull you together and as motivation to continue to get better and do it for one another and do it for your teammates that have been lost to injury, or it pulls some teams apart.
The psychological impact hit harder than the physical losses. Imagine being a fan who bought season tickets expecting to watch Clark light up scoreboards, only to see her in a walking boot on the bench. The energy at Gainbridge Fieldhouse went from electric to funeral quiet real quick. Message boards were filled with fans wondering if they should even bother showing up anymore. This wasn't just losing players, this was losing hope.
When I look at this group, I'm just so incredibly thankful for the type of people that we have in this locker room, for the way that they have been able to continue to stay the course and bounce back and stay together, to pull for one another, to really be flexible enough to make space for different types of teams that we've had throughout the course of the year, and to continue to put ourselves in position.
What happened next would have broken most franchises. The Fever roster turned into a revolving door of hardship signings and emergency call-ups. 18 different players suited up at some point during the season. 18. Think about that for a second. Most teams use maybe 10 to 12 players regularly. Indiana was pulling people off couches and out of overseas leagues just to fill out a starting lineup.
Inside Howard, off the window, the bucket, and the foul. Petty three, knocks it down again. Lost the handle, gets it back, gets right to the hoop, and she drops it home.
Fever 94, Mystics 65. Indiana's in. And now you know, despite all the adversity, this incredibly resilient Fever team is going back to the playoffs in 2025.
Odyssey Sims got a call while she was probably planning her vacation. Shea Petty went from unknown to starter overnight. Aerial Powers found herself with major minutes when she expected to be a bench warmer. The team photo from training camp became a joke because half the faces in it were already gone by midseason. Every week brought new names, new faces, and new chemistry that had to be built from scratch.
And more than anything, y'all, big picture-wise, this group, there would have been so many teams that would have folded with all we've been through. And we just kept getting better, and we kept getting tougher, and we kept becoming more resilient, and we kept figuring things out, right? Like, we've had like 7 new teams throughout the course of this season. and no matter what, we've been flexible, we've been accountable, we've put each other in positions to be successful, and we've continued to put one foot forward and stayed the course.
Behind the scenes, players started dark humor betting pools about who would get hurt next. Not because they were callous, but because it was the only way to cope with the insanity. Veterans like Natasha Howard were giving crash courses in team systems to players who literally just walked through the door. The coaching staff was drawing up plays for lineups they'd never practiced together. It should have been chaos. It should have been unwatchable basketball. Instead of panicking, Stephanie White did something brilliant. She threw the complex playbook out the window and got back to basics. No fancy schemes, no complicated rotations that would confuse new players. She simplified everything down to effort, execution, and playing for each other. White looked at this disaster and saw opportunity. Every practice became about building trust between players who barely knew each other's names. The coaching staff started holding extra film sessions, not to install plays, but to help players understand tendencies and timing. White made a crucial decision. Instead of trying to replace what they lost, she would build something completely different. Something that relied on collective toughness rather than individual brilliance. She turned necessity into strategy, and it started paying off in ways nobody expected. White also did something that separated her from other coaches facing similar situations. She embraced the adversity publicly. In interviews, she didn't make excuses or talk about what they were missing. She talked about what they were discovering. She sold her players on the idea that this chaos was making them stronger, more versatile, and ultimately more dangerous than any team that had it easy. Then came September 7th in Washington, and everything clicked in the most devastating way possible. The Fever didn't just beat the Mystics, they absolutely demolished them 94-65 in a performance so dominant it felt personal. This wasn't competitive basketball. This was a statement game that announced Indiana was done playing victim and ready to be the villain. The first half was competitive, but something shifted at halftime. Maybe it was the realization that playoffs were within reach. Maybe it was months of frustration finally boiling over. Whatever it was, the Fever came out of that locker room looking like a completely different team. The third quarter became a masterclass in suffocating defense and efficient offense that left Washington gasping for air. 9 points. That's all the Mystics managed in that third quarter. 9 points against a team that was supposedly playing with scraps and spare parts. Indiana forced turnovers, capitalized on every mistake, and turned a competitive game into a blowout so thorough that garbage time started with 8 minutes left. The lead stretched to 33 points at one point, and you could see Washington players checking the clock, wondering when this torture would end. Natasha Howard led the way with 17 points, attacking the rim like she had something to prove. Aliyah Boston controlled the paint with another double-double, her 17th of the season. But the most impressive part was the balance. 5 players in double figures. 5 different weapons that Washington couldn't account for because Indiana had been forced to develop depth that most teams never achieve. While the world was focused on what Indiana was missing, Aliyah Boston was busy becoming what they needed most. The numbers tell part of the story. 17 double-doubles in a single season, breaking the franchise record previously held by Caitlin Clark. But numbers don't capture the leadership, the composure, or the way she steadied a ship that should have been sinking. Boston wasn't just producing on the court. She was holding everything together behind the scenes. When new players arrived confused and overwhelmed, Boston was there with guidance. When the team faced adversity during games, Boston was the calm voice keeping everyone focused. She turned herself into the anchor that this chaotic roster desperately needed, and her teammates responded by playing harder for her than they ever had for anyone else. The transformation was visible to anyone paying attention. Boston went from being Clark's supporting cast to being the unquestioned leader of this team. She carried herself differently, spoke with more authority, and played with a confidence that infected everyone around her. This wasn't just about basketball skills. This was about mental toughness and emotional intelligence that you can't teach. After clinching playoffs in that Washington blowout, Boston gathered her teammates in the locker room and dropped a line that instantly became the team's unofficial motto. Never doubt yourself and what you're capable of, no matter what happens. Simple words, but they hit different coming from someone who had just broken franchise records while her team was falling apart around her. Those 7 words became more than just motivation. They became identity. Players started repeating it before games, during timeouts, and in interviews. Fans picked it up and started chanting it in the stands. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about a mindset that said external circumstances don't determine internal strength. The mantra worked because it came from authenticity. Boston wasn't giving them some generic motivational speech copied from a poster. She was speaking from experience, from someone who had watched her team get decimated and decided to rise above it instead of making excuses. When your leader believes that deeply in collective capability, it becomes contagious in the best possible way. But Boston understood something crucial that most leaders miss. She balanced celebrating the moment with maintaining focus on what was next. After clinching playoffs, she admitted the team made a TikTok video to celebrate, but quickly shifted back to business mode. She reminded everyone that the job wasn't finished, that playoffs were just the beginning of what they could accomplish together. Here's the plot twist that nobody saw coming. This injury play disaster of a season might have been the best thing that ever happened to the Indiana Fever. Think about it. When Clark returns next season, she's not coming back to a team that relied on her for everything. She's coming back to a squad that learned how to win without her, that developed chemistry and toughness that can't be taught in practice. The Fever now have something most championship teams spend years trying to build: genuine depth and collective confidence. 18 different players got meaningful minutes and contributed to this playoff run. That's not desperation anymore. That's versatility. When you can plug in anybody and maintain your level of play, you become incredibly difficult to game plan against. The veterans who stepped up during this crisis aren't going back to bench roles when everyone gets healthy. Natasha Howard proved she can be a primary scorer. Aerial Powers showed she belongs in important moments. Shea Petty demonstrated she can knock down clutch shots. Boston established herself as a franchise cornerstone who can lead championship runs. These aren't role players anymore. They're proven contributors with playoff experience. The mental toughness forged during this season is going to pay dividends for years. This group went through the worst-case scenario and came out stronger. They faced adversity that would have broken most teams and turned it into fuel. When they face challenges in future seasons, they'll know they can handle anything because they already survived everything. Most importantly, They proved that star power isn't everything. Chemistry, effort, and collective belief can overcome talent gaps that look insurmountable on paper. The Fever didn't just make playoffs despite losing their best players. They made playoffs because losing those players forced them to become something better than the sum of their parts. The playoff matchups ahead are going to be brutal. Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Phoenix are all dangerous opponents with more talent on paper. But here's what those teams don't have: the unbreakable bond that comes from surviving the impossible together. They don't have the confidence that comes from proving doubters wrong. They don't have a leader like Boston who turned personal adversity into collective strength. Indiana fans should be more excited about this playoff run than any in recent memory, not despite the injuries, but because of them. This team discovered something special in the wreckage of their season. They found an identity that can't be injured, traded, or taken away. They found a belief system that turns role players into heroes and obstacles into opportunities. When Boston stood in that locker room and told her teammates to never doubt what they're capable of, she wasn't just talking about basketball. She was revealing the mindset that transformed a disaster into destiny. And if this is what they can accomplish with half a roster, imagine what happens when they're whole again. The league better take notice, because the Indiana Fever aren't just back. They're built different now.